Hello and welcome to those who have joined so far. We're just going to wait a few more minutes to get as many people as possible into the webinar before we get started. But welcome to everybody who's here already. Okay, welcome everybody. We've still got people coming in, but I'd just like to say welcome to all of you who have joined so far. I'm really looking forward to facilitating this webinar on monitoring the strength of WASH systems. We've got a great lineup for you today. And it's really nice to see so much interest in a subject that has a tendency to be a little obscure, a little bit nerdy. We're used to having webinars in which we talk about our programming or very specific technical issues. But here, what we're going to be talking about is how we measure what we achieve when it comes to a particular type of programming that all of the agencies on this webinar are engaged in, which is strengthening WASH systems. We all call that something different, but talking together like this as a sector-wide group is very important and will help bring a lot of clarity to this issue. Marina, if you could go to the first slide, please. I'm your chair today, and the objectives of this is to talk about strengthening WASH systems, in particular, developing a core set of indicators, to learn how the partners on this call think their work can contribute to this, and launch a call for evidence. So the next slide has our agenda. We're going to open with opening remarks, then we've got a couple of presentations, and then we've got a great lineup of stakeholders who are going to give us their reflections before we close and look at how this is going to go forward in the future. So what I'd like to do to open this is to turn over to three people who are with institutions that are engaged in the common initiative so far. I'm going to turn over first to Bruce to do the opening. Bruce, I'm going to ask you to turn over to Cecilia from UNICEF, and then over to Gustavo from the World Bank to get us started. So Bruce, over to you.
Okay, thanks so much, Clarissa, and thanks everyone for joining. So as you kind of alluded to, we've really been talking as a sector about system strengthening for many years. And it's almost become a mantra, and I think rightly so, you know, as we talk about moving away from sort of a project-based approach to broader strengthening of institutions and policies and investments. And as you said, Clarissa, it gets a little bit complex. But I think now, because of that complexity and because of the momentum that we're seeing, it's really opportune to take it to the next level. So when I say that, I think there's really a need to kind of elevate this and kind of focus down on kind of what we mean by system strengthening, so that we can kind of shape thinking, and for governments around the world that need to take leadership on this to measure progress. And of course, countries are rightly expecting their voice in the development trajectory which systems strengthening approaches can provide. And as you also mentioned, for this to work and to function, the sector does need to agree to a common framework for monitoring the strength of these systems. So when we say that, there's a little bit of demystification that we're talking about, but this is about a proposition for a core set of indicators, which, you know, sort of believe it or not, we have many tools, but is lacking when it comes to the system. So as far as internationally comparable system strengthening indicators, they're not there yet. But as I said, there's a lot of momentum right now, and there's a lot of aligned thinking, and we'll hear from Cecilia and Gustavo in a moment, but each of our institutions and many, many others are already kind of promoting this in different words. And so let me just say also that I think we're seeing system strengthening in a number of political declarations. We see it in the emerging G20 declaration. It was talked about at the big conference last year in New York. It was talked again in Dushanbe last week. And so it's really become a consensus. But I think for a consensus to work, it needs clarity, because I think people can always agree on a bit of ambiguity that gives everyone a bit of wiggle room to work. And of course, there is a little bit of flexibility with this, but we do need to, in our view, come to some sort of consensus on the indicator. So just to say, from a WHO perspective, we're really excited to work with UNICEF on this. We're excited to work with the World Bank, and of course, all of you and many on the call, your institutions and as individuals, you've also been promoting this, and we're proud to kind of follow your lead as well. So thanks again, and I'd like now to pass it over to Cecilia Sharp, who, as you can see from your slide, is the director of it's quite a longer title now, Climate Resilient Water Sanitation and Hygiene Program at UNICEF. So over to you, Cecilia.
Thank you, Bruce, and thank you for giving me time to give a few reflections in this really, what shall I say, a webinar that comes right in time. And it's really about aligning forces on system strengthening, I believe. We see already this movement among sector actors, as you said, Bruce. So many are engaged in this. But still, I believe it needs an extra effort from us all to ensure that we move better together. This is to have a better understanding, of course, of how we progress, and if we do the right things to facilitate acceleration of sustainable and equitable and resilient services, which is where we all are working and are aiming at. So, of course, working with you and colleagues at the WHO on GLAS, but also closer with the World Bank and many, many other actors, is a strong move in the right direction. As others, UNICEF has been working with sector approaches to WASH system strengthening for many years. And I think our experiences from both global and country level work with governments can possibly help to support this process. And hence we are super intrigued to be part of this bigger movement that I see now. And maybe in addition to what you said, Bruce, just to mention the need to shift and how we track progress in countries. When we do that, we also need to recognize maybe a little bit more that we are living in this fast changing global landscape that impacts on our systems, for instance, from climate change, fragility, conflict, to also this shifting global donor landscape, where there are new priorities and the proportion of ODA going to WASH sector is drastically decreasing. And hence, I suppose this means that we also need to work differently at the systemic level and adapt our systems programming to these new realities that we're actually facing. So this is, of course, to ensure that our system strengthening work and support to government remains also relevant and that it can be monitored and tracked. I think we should also recognize that this urgent and very strategic shift that we are looking for at this moment needs some leadership, but it also needs collective action with governments at the center, as you also mentioned, Bruce. And I think this demands us all actors to work more in partnership, but it needs partnership across the multilateral system, and hence really happy to see the World Bank and UNICEF and WHO moving together. But of course, we need to bring all the public and private sector actors, academia, and of course, civil society, who is extremely important in this shift. And we hope that this joint initiative on core systems indicators and new framework will help to reassure also donors that we can move together and prioritizing contributions to joint results over individual results and attribution from project approaches. So really move as a sector. Using an internationally agreed set of core indicators to track overall progress being made at national and subnational level can be also the center of our joint-led sector reviews to inform country priorities and actions for the sector. So again, I'm super excited, as you said, this is about today's discussion, that we can see so many trusted partners coming together in this first discussion on the process on how we can strengthen and monitor WASH systems and support governments in this process. So with this, I'm happy now to transfer the word to you, Gustavo. Gustavo Saltiel is a global lead for water supply and sanitation, Global Solutions Group at the World Bank. And over to you for some introductory remarks, Gustavo.
Thank you, Cecilia, and thank you, Bruce, and also to WHO and UNICEF for the great and growing partnership around WASH systems and systems change. Also, thanks to Clarissa for chairing the session. So, as mentioned by Bruce, we know that the global water crisis is one of the most urgent multidimensional crises that is threatening the Sustainable Development Goals and is obviously exacerbated by climate change. We have more than 700 million people who live in a country with high or critical water stress and 350 million that suffer from acute food insecurity. According to UNICEF, by 2040, 1 in 4 children will live in areas with extreme water shortages, which will further increase the risk factors for child mortality and also for early childhood stunting globally from unsafe water supply and sanitation, which will impact human capital and economic growth. Therefore, policy, institutional, and regulatory reforms, system changes, will be critical to address the challenge. It's not only about more investments, more financing, more money, but also about these system changes. A long-term vision that focuses on creating capacity at all levels of government and across institutions that promotes basic activities such as demand management, in the case of urban systems, cost recovery strategies through well-structured tariffs and subsidies, reducing losses in the systems, and of course, embracing innovation. All of those will be central to achieve sustainable and lasting system change. This comprehensive approach can create the enabling environment required to achieve universal access to WASH and related indicators as mentioned by Bruce as well. Now, Cecilia mentioned a few important words. You said, Cecilia, we are looking for a bigger movement, for shifting the donor landscape, and I'm quoting you, for collective action. And so related to this, as some of you may be aware, the World Bank has recently launched the Fast Track Water Security and Climate Adaptation Global Challenge Program, as we call it. It's a priority, it's a global priority for the World Bank that constitutes a major shift from the short-term, project-based, siloed approaches to moving towards coordinated planning, reforms, and investments. This program, the Water Security and Climate Adaptation Global Challenge Program, aims to double the number of people benefiting from water sector investments. My colleague, Claire Chase, will provide more details about this program during her intervention later. But also, as mentioned by you, Cecilia, this shift will require strong collaboration between governments, development organizations, multilateral development banks, the private sector, etc. Recognizing that individual contributions will not take us, has not taken us actually very far and will not take us far. As such, this Global Challenge Program that the World Bank is launching will build partnerships globally, regionally, and at the country level to drive these system changes and increase funding and financing for WASH. The World Bank is happy to collaborate with WHO, with UNICEF and other partners on this challenge program and on this initiative to monitor the strength of WASH systems. Thanks again for this opportunity, and back to Clarissa now. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Gustavo, and thanks very much also to Bruce and Cecilia for getting us off to a great start. I'm now going to hand over to Fiona Gore at WHO, who many of you know because she leads on the Global Analysis and Assessment of Sanitation and Drinking Water, the GLASS program. And Fiona, picking up on what Bruce said about demystifying, I hope you're going to present a little, for a few minutes to us, just to say, what do we mean when we say system strengthening? Everybody uses different terms and means different things. And what do we know about the need for both doing system strengthening, but also being able to track progress? Over to you, Fiona.
Great, thanks, Clarissa, and thank you, Bruce and Cecilia and Gustavo, for this great start. Well, as you say, Clarissa, I'd like to take this opportunity to share the vision for the monitoring aspect and for monitoring the strengths of WASH systems. And I'd like to take you on a little journey and hopefully shed some light on what we mean and why we're actually here together today. I mean, as you've all said, there's a lot of work going on WASH system strengthening by many organizations, many entities, and has been actually for quite a few years. Now today, it's about coming together. It's about aligning. But the question that really we want to ask here is, do we have a sound, agreed core set of indicators and a common monitoring and review framework to support decision-making, to monitor progress, to evaluate impact, and ensure accountability? Do we have a monitoring strategy that we can all align and support at all levels across all key stakeholders? Well, quite simply, the answer is no, we don't. And that's why we're here today. But then that poses the next question. How do we do this? And how can we do this in a meaningful way and all agree and align? I mean, I think we all recognize that few countries actually have information systems that track and monitor particularly inputs and process. And we know little about how these systems respond to increased inputs and improved processes, which then in turn influence outcomes and impacts on health. So more than ever, there's a need to define, as has been said in the opening, a core set of indicators for assessing the strength of WASH systems while developing and implementing appropriate sustainable measurement strategies to produce the required data and integrating these indicators into subnational and national monitoring and review mechanisms. This is the missing piece, the monitoring piece. Next slide, please. So I think we've all recognized that progress is lagging behind. There's a need to accelerate. And the world is dramatically off track to reach SDG 6.1, 6.2. Some countries don't necessarily have even basic access, let alone, access to safely managed services. And gains are not reaching the most vulnerable and those that need it most. Yet, there is some positive news. Some countries have successfully and rapidly increased coverage, as reported by the WHO, UNICEF, JMP, the Joint Monitoring Programme for Water Supply, Sanitation and Hygiene. But the question here is, why are some countries making rapid progress in delivering WASH services and some less so? What are those factors that lead some countries to make that rapid progress towards increasing access to services and others not? What are the enablers? What are the hindering factors? Next slide, please. So what we attempted to do in the last GLASS survey, the UN Water Global Analysis and Assessment of Sanitation and Drinking Water, we tried to do some analysis that provided some valuable initial insights, but much more work still needs to be done. More data needs to be analysed to answer the question we initially posed. What are those factors that are going to help move the needle? So in the GLASS report, we explored a little bit to better understand what distinguishes acceleration and those that need to accelerate and those that are lagging behind. And the team conducted some exploratory analysis using data from countries, using their national targets and historic rates of change to categorize them as on track or acceleration needed. Now, this work has really given us some really critical insights, but it's not enough. More needs to be done to pinpoint what those factors precisely are and how we're going to accelerate progress. Next slide, please. So I think we've mentioned that, many organizations have been working on WASH system strengthening. There's clearly convergence in the sector towards system strengthening, systems thinking, and, that includes work by UNICEF, the World Bank, IRC, Water for People, WaterAid, OECD, COE, SWA, UN Water, WHO, and, many others. But actually, there's a number of different ways of describing it. And do we all mean the same thing? Do we all use the same categories? Do we all use the same buckets? And I think, Marina, if you can click, we all sort of understand and have different buckets, different frameworks. And we all sort of understand and manage to put the various bits and pieces and labels where we should. But the question here is it making sense? Is it making sense to countries? Are we talking and walking the talk in a coherent way? The reality is that many national systems still have inadequate plans, financing and capacity to deliver on the promise of their own national targets, but let alone the SDGs. The public health case for investing in WASH services is clear and increasingly urgent in the context, as Cecilia was saying, climate change, AMR, rapid urban growth, and many more. Next slide, please. So moving towards a common approach will really contribute to more effective and efficient WASH work. But this means partners aligning to support a government-led sector-wide approach and supporting coherently the monitoring, the strength of WASH systems using a national monitoring and review platform that will enable decision makers to accurately monitor progress, track system performance, assess the current strengths and weaknesses, identify investment requirements, plan remedial courses of action, and ensure transparency and accountability. So now my last question, how are we going to do this? And this is where I'm going to pass over to my colleague Aidan at UNICEF to actually talk about the initiative and the multi-stakeholder initiative. With that, thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Fiona. And Aidan, I know that UNICEF has been working for several years on system strengthening. So you come into this with direct knowledge of what it means to do system strengthening as a programmatic agency. But can you, we're looking to you now to tell us a bit about what you've learned from this, but also what is happening with this multi-stakeholder initiative and what its objectives are. So over to you, Aidan.
Thanks a lot, Clarissa, and very happy to be here. As you mentioned, UNICEF has been indeed working on WASH system strengthening for several years now. I mean, we really see strong governance systems and the enabling environment as critical to that. If we're really going to extend and sustain services, also in emergency contexts, I might add, and the growing fragility that we see in the world today. So when we track our systems work, our own targets, we see good progress on areas around climate rationale, countries having WASH included in national climate policies, NDCs, NAPs. But we see challenges on the finance side. So more work needed there, as is needed also for sustainability. Important also to remember the importance of innovation and research to help accelerate progress at scale and influence evidence-based policy. But I think maybe another learning that we've seen is putting the triple nexus work, so bringing together humanitarian development and peace building under our systems tracking work, because this is important to incorporate conflict sensitivity analysis, including gender, into this overall assessment of WASH systems and sectors. So anyway, not to dwell on this, because it's that I think each of the organizations today, the purpose isn't to explain what we or how we approach systems, but it's more about, as all the speakers have said so far, how do we come together around this joint initiative for developing standard set of core WASH system strengthening indicators, gaining insights from existing monitoring mechanisms while working towards developing a common monitoring and review framework, as Fiona has outlined, and really to put governments at the center of that. So we're really happy to be working with WHO in close collaboration with the World Bank to take this work forward together. In strong collaboration, of course, with governments, multilateral agencies, donors, NGOs, academia, and other development partners. And we've already got, I think, some good examples from national level, as we see in joint sector reviews, extremely important touch point in a WASH sector's journey through every year or two. So that kind of collaboration and spirit and evidence-based approach based on maybe WASH bats or sector analysis. I think that kind of spirit is what we want to see also coming into this initiative. So in the context of limited funding and the growing needs, that there's really a strong need, as the colleagues have already said, for more coherent and efficient support to countries to also reflect the growing impacts of the climate crisis. So such an approach will also rely on development partners modeling strong collaboration and a shift in incentives towards a culture of shared sector results. And we may need to see more partners and sector donors accepting contribution over attribution results reporting. We even had actually discussed this in our recent UNICEF WASH Partners meeting, a very good discussion on that. And that we saw, if done well, this can signal important intent to national government and partners on the value of collective action and an international commitment to prioritizing national government needs. So if I move to the next slide, just what are the phases of this work, of this approach that we're talking about today? So the joint initiative will be co-convened and coordinated by WHO and UNICEF in collaboration with the World Bank and a select group of partners, countries, and WASH actors. We're now in phase 1, which is really around the background concept note, which has been shared, and the preparatory and kind of introduction of the approach. Phase 2 will begin shortly. We'll see terms of reference being developed for a technical working group, which will discuss and develop candidates for the core indicators. And then phase 3 will be the pilot testing that will outline roles and responsibilities, time commitments, expectation for engagement, etc. And that's really on a voluntary basis. We hope organizations kind of, under their own programs can step up and be involved. And of course, it's important that this is a sector-wide initiative, so it will be coordinated in collaboration with WASH-related sector working groups. I'm thinking of such initiatives and groupings such as Agenda for Change, of course the JMP Glass Strategic Advisory Group, and linking with their ongoing work to identify indicators to monitor global climate resilient WASH and related efforts around tracking the WASH sector within the overall global goal on adaptation. And also the links to the white paper on improving monitoring of the means of implementation for water and sanitation. We've new sector developments happening right now, the UN Water system-wide strategy for water and sanitation, and of course the UN Water WASH expert group. These are all important touch points also for this work. The SWA Systems and Financing Working Group, the IMI SDG 6 Steering Committee, the OECD Water Governance Initiative. So all of these initiatives, if we're really to have a one sector approach, kind of a unified thinking on system strengthening, it's important that we consult widely, and the outcome and learning from the joint initiative will be also shared during various sector meetings and conferences the upcoming 2026 and 28 UN water conferences, as well as, of course, a host of other global and regional conferences and meetings that are going on. So, and the time frame is really looking at moving now into the next, the rest of this year, and then kind of into next year to really get phase 2 bedded down, and then getting into phase 3, and eventually scaling up by countries in phase 4. So if I go to the next slide, you can see that here we hope that the core indicators will be progressively adopted by countries into their national monitoring systems. That's the ultimate vision, actually, for regional and global monitoring, that we do strengthen those national systems to be able to track, to understand their own strengths and weaknesses in their own WASH systems, but then also to the tracking of that as well, and the targeting of resources in the WASH sector. So adopting an international standardized core set of indicators will allow countries also to benchmark their performance against countries of different size or different income categories. So that's also important, so that we give a level of ambition to countries to step up on their WASH system strengthening work. Looking forward, we want to see harmonization and standardization of the core indicators to further contribute to the evidence base of methodologies for monitoring the strength of WASH systems, including climate resilience. So, so there's a lot of huge benefits that could come out of us all aligning in behind this initiative together. We really are excited about it. We also want to see, of course, that the burden of reporting is reduced by this initiative on countries. So if I move to my last slide, this is an example from the health sector around monitoring of primary healthcare performance. It's an example of a national performance dashboard, which is used at country level. And this is an initiative that WHO is involved in on the health side, of course. It shows how indicators can come together to provide a snapshot of the situation and inform decision-making to decision makers, and that that kind of easily understood portrayal of the situation that can be readily adopted. We recently had our chief of WASH from Ukraine telling us how important it is for them when they're making recommendations to the government, that it's packaged in a very simple way for decision makers who have obviously a lot of things going on in their mind and at the moment. So simple, straightforward, easy to understand is very, very important in getting decisions that matter in an evidence-based way. So elements in this profile include capacity, which incorporates governance of financing, performance, such as quality and access, impacts around health, resilience, equity, etc. And I think this has given us also some ideas for this approach in the WASH sector itself, so that there are initiatives out there in other sectors that we can build upon, and hopefully this will all, of course, help the transparency and accountability for results of national and local governments moving forward. So with that, I'll hand it back to you, Clarissa, and thanks again for this opportunity to share.
Okay, thanks very much, Aidan. That's great. So I'm very happy now to call on Claire Chase from the World Bank, who's going to talk a little bit about how they're tackling system strengthening and what they are learning about this issue of tracking of progress. Claire, before I turn over to you, I'm just going to note that I see that there's an informal exchange that has cropped up in the chat. Fiona is very kindly monitoring that. So if questions are coming up, put them in the chat, and Fiona, you'll either provide answers or perhaps let me know of things that you want asked of the presenters. So thanks very much. Claire, over to you.
Thank you, Luke. Thank you, Clarissa, and thank you so much to the WHO and UNICEF teams for inviting us to be part of this webinar and also part of this initiative, which I think really fantastic presentations so far, and really helping to, I think, build the the justification and the need for this approach. So let me just start. You can go to the next slide. I want to give just very briefly some more background on the Global Challenge program that Gustavo mentioned in the opening remarks. And I think that it's important just to put this framing out there, because really a lot of what has already been discussed is the motivation for this Global Challenge program on water security and climate adaptation. It's about partnership with other multilateral development banks, with UN agencies, with all of the other partners, and with governments, of course, in the driver's seat. It's about scale, how to do things that we can replicate, that we know what works, and we can move to scale in achieving SDGs. And it's about the systems change for sustainability. So I think, you know, we're all sort of aligning in this approach, and I think it's important just to put this out there. So I don't need to go into much detail here, but I think one of the two important aspects that I just want to highlight, one is this program is also really about how do we leverage private sector financing, and how do we move countries and governments towards more sustainable financial sustainability. And a lot of that is going to require private financing. And system strengthening is one of the key elements to bring governments towards that stage to access and utilize commercial financing. And the second thing that we haven't talked much about today is we need this system strengthening approaches also in fragile and conflict settings. And that's a real emphasis of the Global Challenge program. And I think we need a way to monitor and also support fragile settings in the systems so that we can transition out of that stage. You can move to the next slide. So I already talked a little bit about this, what is different from the work that the bank has supported in the past, which traditionally has been a more project focused. Now it's really about this long-term engagement with countries, supporting national programs, doing that in partnership with government, of course, in the driver's seat, but other partners as well. This is reflecting on a commitment that was made at COP28 with other MDBs. So it's not just about what the World Bank is doing and where the World Bank is investing, but really where all of our partners are investing. And also just about this long-term engagement. So working with countries to set ambitious targets and be with them every step of the way on this roadmap towards sustainability. You can move to the next slide. So how are we thinking about this long-term engagement and the approach that we take with different countries? Obviously, you know, the motivation here for the systems monitoring is that not every country is going to be at the same stage in their sustainability journey. And so we sort of are approaching countries depending on meeting them where they are in this process. So some countries, we're at a stage where, you know, really what's needed is a diagnosis of their systems and where they are in terms of sustainability and service delivery, diagnosing what are the service delivery challenges, and then progressively supporting and delivering on the reforms that are needed to strengthen service delivery. Other countries are further along in the pathway towards sustainable outcomes. They have a well-defined tariffs, they're achieving cost recovery, they have the policies and the programs in place to really go to scale. So it's really about, I mean, we're showing sort of these different phases, this roadmap that we envision all countries to be on towards sustainability, not just, you know, technical sustainability, operational sustainability, financial sustainability, and of course, resilience to shocks. And I think here, importantly, the systems, the WASH systems monitoring framework and the indicators that we're talking about here can really be instrumental to help us, you know, in those situations where we need the diagnosis. I really liked that that scoreboard that that Aidan shared. If we could have something like that for every country, I mean, that would just be amazing, because it would save so much time when all of our agencies go in and sort of do these diagnoses to understand where we need to support. And then, of course, along the way, having that that scoreboard so we can know what are the appropriate interventions at each step of the way. Next slide. So just to emphasize that we see the GCP really as a mechanism for supporting this system strengthening and all of these challenges, the policy, institutions, regulations, systems challenges that we face. Next slide. So as has been mentioned a couple times, I mean, there are different organizations have different terms for what they call system strengthening in the World Bank. We call it PIR, which stands for Policies, Institutions, and Regulations. It's been work that was the concept itself we developed around 2016 to 2018, and since then have been supporting PIR in over 20 countries, and that number is growing. And so there's a lot that we have learned from this process, and I think the example given by Fiona, where they looked at the glass, some of the systems indicators and how they were progressing in terms of outcomes. I think that's a lot of where we can really contribute to this initiative by demonstrating and having some of the evidence where we can see, you know, what system reforms have really led to positive outcomes in different countries. So next slide. So I don't need to go into too much detail here, but just to give a flavor of what we mean by policies, institutions, and regulation. And I think this is part of the process that we need to go through to sort of converge across organizations and with government clients on what are these key building blocks of PIR systems and what's needed to progress on each of these building blocks. So next slide. You can skip over this one, just showing the countries where we've implemented PIR. So I just want to quickly give one example of how we've integrated PIR into World Bank investments. So this is a case from Nigeria where Bank was involved for many years in the urban sector, urban water supply sector in Nigeria. And in 2018 had undertaken this diagnosis that I mentioned to try to understand what are the service delivery constraints in the country for water supply and sanitation and across all subsectors. On the basis of the findings of that diagnosis, the government declared a state of emergency for rural wash, and that led to the development of a $700 million program for results investment of the World Bank. And program for results simply means that the loan is dispersed based on achievement of predefined indicators. So this is a very effective way to embed some of these PIR reforms with the investments so that we can achieve the progressive strengthening that's needed. So next slide. So this is we could say this was one of the disbursement linked indicators for the program for results in Nigeria. And this is what we call state PIR plans. So each of the 7 states that are supported under the program, they developed an assessment of where they are across these different areas of systems towards achieving sustainability and sustainable outcomes. And then identified what are the targets that they are going to achieve in order to reach this, after the 6 years of the program, the objective of that particular reform. And so the disbursement linked results are things like, you know, on the institutional and budget allocation side, on the regulatory side, so strengthening the sanitation, urban sanitation subsector, accountability of utilities, regulation, different areas that, again, were sort of based on the diagnosis at the beginning, were identified as elements that needed to be supported. So again, I think something that we can really learn from in terms of how we identify what are those key indicators that we want to be tracking towards system strengthening. Last slide. And here I just wanted to share, I think, many agencies, UNICEF in particular, and the World Bank are supporting governments on these multi-stakeholder platforms and really seeing these as instruments for change involving all stakeholders. And potentially this could be a very effective mechanism for doing this initial diagnosis, but also I think, as Fiona said, as the monitoring platform over time to be able to track progress on these indicators. So let me stop there and hand it back to Clarissa. Thank you.
Thanks, Claire. Thanks. That's great. And we have a panel of stakeholders who are going to come in with their reflections in a minute. But just before I hand over to them, Claire, I just wanted to sort of follow up with a quick question to you based on this really interesting presentation that you've made. And it's clear that Fiona presented this interesting slide that showed all the different ways in which different agencies talk about system strengthening and building blocks. And I think you've also shown that the World Bank also has very clear ideas on what the building blocks of system strength are, and you're already working on supporting them. One of the things that I just wanted to sort of bounce off you is one of the things that Aidan talked about was shared sector results. And I think we're in a very interesting period for our sector right now, because we are talking more about this idea of shared sector results, of institutions coming together, working individually, but towards a far more sort of cohesive and coherent end goal, working with the countries we're trying to support. So I just wondered if and I don't want to blindside you with this question, but working on this and hearing what others are saying, what do you have to say about this idea of trying to have a set of shared metrics? It's quite an ambitious thing to do, to have shared metrics across all countries, across all agencies. But I'm just wondering what the World Bank's experience tells you about the possibility of being able to do that.
Well, thank you, Clarissa. I think if we set that as our objective, we can achieve it. But just to say, based on our experience, when we're developing indicators for projects, it is very difficult. But I think having the shared vision is the first step. And it's going to be a consultative process, right? I think we need to be realistic that this will take time. It will take a lot of consultation. I really loved the scoreboard that we show from health. And again, I'll just re-emphasize my point that having something like this for every country could be hugely valuable. I think it's also, the indicators and the monitoring help us to not only all sort of speak the same language, but also come with consistent interventions and consistent support. So just to give an example, and I won't name the country, but if we show based on this core indicators that a country is already in a position to leverage private finance, and there's a willing bank for lending to this utility, it's going to be counterproductive for another agency to come in with grant funding for that particular project, right? I mean, this is what you're saying about shared results. If we're all sort of aiming for that ultimate service outcome, then having this aligned understanding from the investment side is also going to be really important to achieve that shared result. So it's not going to be easy, but we're happy to be here along for the ride.
Great, thank you. I think that's a really insightful answer. And obviously we don't monitor for monitoring's sake. We're doing it for exactly what you just said, in order to be able to make sure that we're all talking the same language when we talk to countries, and we're all sort of rowing in the same direction, as it were. So that's great. Thanks, Claire. And you've set us up well to turn over to our group of stakeholders. Here are all their bright, shiny faces. I'm going to call on each one just to give a few minutes reflection. I've got a question for each one, and I'm going to start with Angela. Angela, you're with IRC, and IRC has been very active for quite a long time in system strengthening. You talk about system strengthening a lot. You've done the All Systems conferences. So do you want to just give us your thoughts on why tracking progress in system strengthening is important as far as IRC is concerned, and perhaps give us a bit of a concrete example in the same way that Claire has just done. So Angela, over to you.
Thanks, Clarissa. Hi, everyone. Well, why is this important? It reminds me a question I saw from Brian in the chat here in saying, isn't looking at the actual level of services delivered the best indication of system strength? Yes, it is. But unfortunately, there's sometimes a lag between the performance of the system and having all the different institutions in place, and then really seeing those service level changes on the ground. So the aim with measuring system strength is to be able to have an upstream indicator of whether things are in place, whether we're going in the right direction, and whether when more investment becomes available, the system is ready to be able to translate that into new services and sustainability of existing infrastructure. So we've seen, I think Fiona shared, there are many frameworks that have been in use, and we've learned a lot and seen some pretty strong commonalities across these, which also reflect some of the points we saw in the health dashboard that Aidan showed. Capacity of key actors, institutions, is essential. Service providers, authorities, regulators, looking at finance flows, budget utilization. Many of these, which are also captured in some ways in GLASS, are really excellent, but can be refined further into indices and also coming from national data. So they're really incorporated into decision-making processes. The last thing I'd want to share is that indicators like non-revenue are a great snapshot of systems performance, and things like IBNet do very well, particularly in the urban sector or where there's utility coverage. There's quite a lot in place. And what we've been trying for the last 10 years in IRC, and I know with many of our sector partners, is to develop a similar set of shared metrics which are relevant in the rural context, in the context of sanitation, where there are many more mixed service delivery models and service providers, so that we have that same shared understanding of the strength of the system, what's working, what needs more investment to be able to then deliver those services.
Okay, thanks very much, Angela. That's great. I'm going to turn next to Ollie Cumming, who's at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. Ollie, you're very familiar with health systems monitoring, I believe. Let us hear your reflections on what we're trying to do here and how you think it will make a difference in our sector.
Great. Thanks, Clarissa. Thanks, everyone. The first thing I would say is, like a few of the speakers before me, I feel this is really timely. I think with sort of 2030 just around the corner, thinking about how we sort of deliver on the original ambition of SDG 6 around universal access to safely managed services. I don't believe that's possible without taking a sort of systems level sort of perspective and approach. The other point, which I think makes this initiative very timely, is that there are additional pressures and challenges for our sector, I would say most notably climate change, which require us to think differently. So I think this is definitely the right time. I'll talk a little bit from my experience from the health sector and the role of research, but just to confirm, I think research and researchers have a contribution to make to this initiative. And I think the opportunity is twofold, and I sort of see this in my experience of working in the context of sort of health system strengthening. The first point is, I think there's an opportunity through an initiative like this at the global and at the national level to steer research and research investments towards the salient challenges at a sector level. So number one, steering researchers in the right direction. But secondly, obviously, I think there's a lot that can be leveraged from the policy community, learning from sort of research and researchers and those perspectives. But critically, they need to be sort of interdisciplinary. So a whole range of researchers have a contribution to make here, whether it's economists, epidemiologists, social scientists, etc. And I would say if there's one gap that I would highlight, it's how we connect national sort of research communities to national systems through these types of, often internationally driven initiatives. The second point I'd really like to make is about connecting the dots across different monitoring and planning systems. So if we were to take an example from the WASH sector, we have the sort of GLASS initiative, which looks at what's coming in to the sector. And we have the Joint Monitoring Programme, which measures what's sort of coming out, if you like, in terms of services. I think if we can think about ways that we can go the sort of full continuum all the way to impact, so the things which Gustavo flagged, so infectious disease, stunting, and ultimately enhancing human capital, we might be a long way off from that today, but that we should design these systems, what we monitor, so that we can connect through to impact. So, examples of where we're starting to do that would be the WHO's sort of burden of disease work, where there are efforts at a national level to empower governments to quantify the disease burden that's been prevented through decisions and progress that have been made, or to think prospectively. And just one last example, I on Friday attended the inaugural meeting of a big initiative that's being led by the Ministry of Health in Mozambique to integrate health surveillance systems. So sort of different to the systems we're talking about, but I think a lot of useful lessons. So they are trying over a 3-year period to integrate environmental surveillance with clinical surveillance around 5 priority pathogens, at least 2 of which, polio and cholera, are sort of very relevant to our sector. And on the environmental side, they're integrating wastewater surveillance as well. So I think there's a lot out there that would allow us to move from understanding what's happening at system level, thinking about access to services, but then through to impact. And I think research, particularly researchers that maybe have experience in other sectors where that people have tried to do this, can sort of feed in and help with this initiative. But yeah, I'll stop there. Thank you, Clarissa.
Great, Ollie. Thanks very much. And really great to have that that perspective coming from health, because I think we've got some inspiring examples to show us how other sectors have done this. Sophie Tremolay is here with us. Sophie, we're so glad to have you here from OECD. OECD has worked on governance issues for a long time, and I understand you've been doing some interesting work on scorecards. So over to you to tell us a bit about that.
Great. Thank you, Clarissa, and very nice to see many of you here. So as others before me, I think I would like to salute this initiative. I think indeed there's a strong need for doing this because we have seen the slide that Fiona shown was quite exemplary. We've seen that there's lots of different frameworks that exist, all with trying to look at different buckets, but with slightly different words. So really, I can see this initiative as being helpful to reduce the burden on countries and to look to harmonize language. So I do think we have a need for common indicators, but I think it's important that it's not being seen as top-down and that there is engagement from country governments. So we need to be clear about what the objectives of these common indicator monitoring framework would be and what are the benefits for the countries themselves, so that it is not seen as a donor-driven approach, but really owned by governments. They need to understand what's in it for them. Is it for purpose of benchmarking their performance, learning, neutral learning, or is it a way of facilitating access to finance? So as you said, Clarissa, OECD has been in the business of doing this kind of work for some time, not only in water. We have a history of building common indicator platforms for funding, such as the Health Accounts Framework, but also you might have heard of the PISA framework for education. And that's really a framework that countries, OECD countries, embrace in order to be able to compare their educational systems. In water, we have developed a similar sort of framework, and that would be one of the frameworks that is built upon for building this common indicator framework. That's what we call the OECD recommendation on water, which applies to OECD and non-OECD countries alike, and sets out what has been agreed by all these governments as principles for a well-managed water sector. So that is what example, for example, what we use when we need to access accession countries, so countries that have applied to join the OECD. For example, current countries that have applied are Indonesia, Argentina, which are all, you know, somewhere in the middle between developing and developed countries, and are being assessed by our teams based on these indicators that reflect a sort of well-functioning water sector, if you want. So I think this could provide an interesting example, an interesting point of reference, and it's worked well in order to drive effectively reforms that help them meet what the expectations are for joining the OECD. This is also something that we applied in non-partner countries, where we conduct dialogues at policy level, so to help really governments understand where they need to put emphasis in terms of reforming their framework. I think in order to define this common framework, we need to be clear about what is included in it. I was struck by Claire's presentation that you highlight that for you systems strengthening is really the PIR framework. I would argue that it's one component, but it's probably not limited to the PIR framework. There needs to be, and I think Angela highlighted it, an emphasis on financing as well, the ability to mobilize financing that goes beyond the water sector. So we will need to identify, if we go towards a dashboard of this kind, what do we track? Is it just sort of a wash-related aspect, or does it go beyond? And Clarissa, you mentioned the scorecard that the OECD has developed to assess the enabling environment for investment in WASH. In fact, we do go beyond water because we recognize that these other factors are really critical. So we look at the overall environment for investment, but also we look at what is happening outside of the water sector in terms of water use, in terms of whether there are other policies which are detrimental to effectively providing water security. So I think this kind of thinking will need to take place as well, so that we are clear about what are the boundaries, what are the different factors, some of which are outside WASH, that may have an impact on this system's strength. That's it for me. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Sophie. That's great. And I think you for the many of the people on this webinar will be WASH sector specialists, and we have to listen to what people are saying about being willing to go outside our comfort zone and look at aspects of the systems that support the WASH sector, that include things that maybe many of us don't know very much about, like what are the determinants of being able to access large-scale financing, for instance. I'm going to turn now to Joe Esteve-Mills from WHO. Joe, I know that you've been doing a lot of work on developing indicators for hand hygiene. And I just wonder if you want to talk a little bit about what you're learning about what we need to track in terms of the systems that support the delivery of hand hygiene services.
Thanks, Clarissa, and hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here today. So just, I think I'll first just very briefly describe the work on hand hygiene, and then highlight just a couple of points around how I think this initiative can be really useful to that work and what we're finding. So WHO and UNICEF are developing new global guidelines on hand hygiene in community settings. These guidelines will identify the minimum material requirements for practicing effective hand hygiene in non-healthcare related settings, and recommend effective behavior change approaches to sustaining practice. The guidelines will also provide implementation guidance, so to support governments in making sure that these minimum requirements and behavior change approaches are in place. And it'll come as no surprise that the implementation guidance we're designing adopts a systems lens. So while the recommendations will emphasize minimum infrastructure, product and service requirements for hand hygiene, the implementation guidance will support governments to consider what elements underpin the effective delivery of these and how to strengthen these elements. So we're co-designing this system strengthening guidance with a group of 10 champion countries from across 5 WHO regions, with a view to arriving at a common understanding of what factors, functions, and actors comprise a well-functioning system for hand hygiene in community settings, and a core set of indicators for monitoring and assessing that system. So this initiative we're discussing today is going to be really useful to this work. Firstly, in terms of avoiding siloed approaches to systems. So of course, with the hand hygiene guidelines, we're always walking a fine line between elevating hand hygiene, looking at hygiene-specific systems indicators on the one hand, and recommending a vertical sort of siloed approach on hand hygiene on the other, which is obviously not something we want to do. And what's useful about this initiative is that it provides us with the common language to insert the work we're doing on hand hygiene within this broader WASH system. And I think that's really important. And secondly, it enables us to link up more meaningfully with other sectors and their systems. So here I'm thinking specifically about health, hand hygiene, also obviously WASH more broadly, key determinants of health, and really should be invested in by the health sector. And I think having clear indicators on WASH systems will go a long way to facilitating more deliberate integration of WASH into health programs and systems. And just one final point, Clarissa, to your question around what are we finding? I think what's been very interesting, and I'm just fresh off looking at the data we've collected from our 10 champion countries, where we asked them to tell us what they feel are important functions that need to be performed in an effective hand hygiene system. And we saw huge commonality, nothing particularly striking about what those functions or factors are, but where we saw some variability and many, many question marks and lack of clarity coming back was around who should be doing what and which actors should be carrying out which functions. And I think that for hand hygiene especially pertains to the fact that, it falls between the cracks. It's always something someone else thinks someone else is doing. But I think it's true for a lot of this systems thinking and systems work. And I think it's not necessarily something we always give so much attention to. So yes, the indicators are important, but also I would say that this work needs to really focus on providing clarity around roles and responsibilities of the actors involved as well. Back to you.
Great, Jo. So I understand what you're saying perhaps is that having these clear metrics of progress on systems makes the WASH sector in some ways easier for other sectors to find bits of us that they recognize and things that are joint with other sectors.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Okay, that's great. Thanks very much. I'm going to turn now to Philippa Raimondo, who's with us from the Sanitation and Water for All partnership. And Philippa, we know that SWA has had their mutual accountability mechanism running for quite a long time. And we'd be interested in hearing from you how this can contribute to the work that is being done on tracking system strengthening, and what SWA has learned from its tracking of results within the partnership.
Thank you, Clarissa, and hello, everyone. So SWA is a partnership that has been working with a multi-stakeholder approach with a partnership with more than 400 partners from government, civil society organizations, learning and research institutions, private sector, external support agencies, and utilities and regulators. We believe that this approach of multi-stakeholders is the way to go, as they provide meaningful but also effective participation and joint working and decision-making between stakeholders. So I believe that even if I'm going for the mutual accountability mechanism a bit later on, because I do believe that it's going to be quite useful to close up why we think this initiative is very fundamental to us, is that because of our experience with engaging with governments, for example, when you mentioned the consultation process and making this joint initiative very country-centered, and focusing on the national context, but also needs of the countries, and especially uses of this information by countries, and for their own decision-making processes. We believe that is something that is very important, not again for a burden of reporting, but really focusing on their own decision-making processes and how they can use the information that is going to be collected to inform their decisions. We also believe that including different stakeholders and especially empowering marginalized and vulnerable populations with this process is very important, because when we're thinking about system strengthening and human rights, they tend to be discussed as separate approaches with limited options available for effectively combining them. So we believe that a joint initiative as this one is also going to be a way to demonstrate that there is great value in systemically integrating human rights into system strengthening approaches. We also believe that because of this SWA mutual accountability mechanism, and what we've learned from it is that we provide countries the opportunity to hold each other accountable for achieving their SDGs targets. And we believe that more than that, we really support them in using this mechanism to learn and catalyze collective action, which is what we believe this initiative will also do. And this is really important because we're creating then inclusive spaces for national WASH stakeholders to come together to jointly identify the successes, but also the gaps and the common priorities for sector improvements, either through our own mechanism, for example, but even creating more spaces because we'll be providing the countries that opportunity and that support. We're also, for us, it's also really important, this initiative, because we're currently working and we have launched our Heads of State initiative last year, which is an initiative to achieve a common vision to secure water, sanitation, and hygiene. And this joint initiative is important because it results on us engaging with governments and having a strong leadership and strong commitments made at the highest level. So we believe that by integrating this joint initiative in our Heads of State initiative as well, and coordinated with advocacy and technical assistance at both global and national levels, will be very important for our partners. So yes, so back to you, Clarissa. Thank you.
Thanks, Philippa. And I think your point about the Heads of State initiative is very important. Heads of State certainly don't want huge amounts of monitoring data put in front of them, but something like a dashboard is the kind of thing that can really speak to somebody at that level of decision making. So thanks very much. So last but not least, I'm going to turn to Bethlehem Mengistu. Bethlehem, you're the coordinator for Agenda for Change, and I know that you're going to speak from the perspective of that alliance of NGOs, but I also know that you have lots of experience working at a country level. So I'm hoping that you will also speak to us your reflections based on that understanding. So I'm going to turn over to you for your reflections based on your sort of double perspective. Over to you.
Thank you, Clarissa, and hi everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. So a little bit about Agenda for Change. Agenda for Change is a collaboration of like-minded organizations who've agreed to a common set of principles and approaches. And Clarissa mentioned was an alliance of NGOs, but it actually also includes donors and networks. Our membership has grown over the past 2 years. And a core element of our strategy, which complements our global community of practice, is incentivizing collective action at the country level through our country collaborations, who are the practitioners implementing WASH system strengthening at national and local levels. So coming to this initiative is quite useful because it links directly to our mission and our strategic priorities, which is to generate robust body of evidence showing the tangible impact of stronger WASH systems on service delivery. However, as the sector has continued to improve on monitoring and learning processes to capture the impact of system strengthening, there are still persisting factors that are holding us back as a sector. And some of those include the fragmentation amongst actors on how success and results are measured at the moment or how they're qualified. Other speakers have mentioned this already, the lack of common matrix, the long-term horizons required to gather significant data, and also the considerable financial resource that's required to generate data in a more comprehensive way that is in line with how we would like to capture results and success for sustainable services. So with regards to how we see the initiative kind of, being positioned to take the sector to the next level is, for Agenda for Change, collaborating on this initiative presents us with the potential to identify possibilities for an expansive and consolidated evidence base. We have been generating evidence from our systems practice, from the work that our members are doing. It's largely been qualitative so far. So the need to make that robust and comprehensive is a shared need that we feel that we can utilize this initiative to be able to gather more comprehensive data. However, the process of positioning this initiative in the right way will be quite important. The process is as important as the end in mind, ensuring that countries, stakeholders, and governments see themselves as contributors and owners during the formative stages will be quite critical for buy-in and sustainability. So when looking at communicating this, it will be useful to communicate it not just another framework, but a solution that is building on existing frameworks and systems. And for also in the communication, there to be an intentional recognition for contextualization, given the fact that countries and governments are at different levels in their system strengthening journeys. And they're also dealing with multiple crises and competing priorities. So positioning this as an offer, which can elevate progress and results towards a shared agenda, which is a universal and sustainable access, and results in that having a multiplier effect on overall development will be quite key. So having the process inform the form will be quite critical as a way forward. Back to you, Clarissa.
Okay, thanks very much. And thanks for those remarks, and particularly about the need to contextualize. And I think that this is one of the strengths of this initiative, is that there are so many different organizations and institutions involved, working with the entire spectrum of different types of countries at different levels, and hopefully, and I'm certainly optimistic that that brings enormous strength, and that we are increasingly on the same page as we wrestle with very different types of problems. So thank you very much, and thanks to all these partners. As many of you know, there's lots of other partners who are also working on this issue. We could have had a panel here of 25 people. So I'm really glad that we had those of you here who present various perspectives, even though that we know that there's many other organizations also interested in and working on this same issue. So I'm going to turn over now to Marina from WHO, who's going to talk us through the next steps. And I know that I know that you're all interested in this, because every so often I go and look at the chat, and I can see a very lively conversation going on there, which is terrific. Many of you interested in what's going to happen and how you can find out more and get involved. So Marina, over to you to tell us what's next.
Thanks so much, Clarissa. So I'll be taking you briefly through the next steps, or what comes next. So we are in the process of actively reaching out across the sector, as we are keen for this to be a very broad multi-stakeholder consultative process. And so I think this webinar is actually a key step in that process of outreach. We are sharing the concept note widely, and we will be continuing our outreach to other stakeholders in the sector, but we're also counting on you for your support. So please, spread the word among your networks, and we are keen for you to be involved in this initiative. We're also in the process of discussing this initiative with countries as well. We were actually supposed to have a country representative on the webinar today, but unfortunately it didn't work out. But we are actively working on identifying pilot countries as well as continuing discussion with country governments on this initiative. We are just starting work on a discussion paper, which I'll be describing in a little bit more detail in the next slide. But we'll actually be turning to you for your support in sharing information and documents in a call for evidence. And we're also starting the preparations for phase 2 of the initiative and preparing to form the technical working groups. So if you're interested in being more extensively involved in this initiative, and in particular in phase 2, please get in touch with us. Your input would be very much appreciated as we plan for and set up the technical working groups. I did see noted in the chat, someone has noted it is, likely to be quite complex given, the subsectors within the sector being quite diverse, which we are aware of, but we hope to come up with sort of a rational process for setting up these technical working groups. And we're also keen to ensure alignment with other key initiatives within the sector. I think others have mentioned an initiative, a joint WHO-UNICEF initiative to identify indicators for climate resilient WASH monitoring, as well as alignment with the SDG 6 means of implementation review, the FCDO WASH Systems for Health initiative, and there are many other ongoing initiatives that we want to ensure that we are aware of and aligning with. Just briefly on the discussion paper, we have started outlining some aspects. We are working with Kellyanne Naylor on this, who has also worked extensively on the concept note, which you've hopefully seen. But in terms of the planned content for this discussion paper, we want to include an overview of existing WASH systems strengthening frameworks. We would like to present a consolidation of existing indicators used by countries and by partners for monitoring of WASH systems elements. We'd like to bring in a comparison with health and other sector systems monitoring frameworks and cross-cutting issues. We'd like to present a review of evidence linking WASH systems elements to outcomes and impact. And finally, we'd like to propose a framework for the core WASH systems indicators. And so I think key to this is really getting your inputs on some of the relevant frameworks and indicators that we should be considering. So we are launching this call for evidence. So please get in touch with us. Please share any relevant frameworks that you know of, any indicators monitoring WASH systems elements. By the 5th of July, and you can see the email address on the slide here, and maybe someone can also put it in the chat so that it's sort of copy pastable. And I see Fiona has also put in the GLASS email address in the chat as well. So, I think we very much welcome your inputs on this. Just in terms of the timeline, up to the end of this year or so, we are in the process of engaging WASH sector stakeholders and countries. This is an ongoing process. I think it will probably be ongoing throughout the lifetime of this initiative. We are going to be developing the discussion paper, which we're starting that process now up until October or so. And so linked to this is this call for evidence. So please share with us any information, documents, frameworks, indicators that you're aware of to the email address shown on the slide. We are going to be developing a process for the consultations to identify and define the core indicators and the monitoring and review framework. So again, if you are keen to be more extensively involved in this initiative, please do get in touch with us. We do want to get your input on how we can be setting up this process in a rational way and in such a way that it is, very broadly consultative and multi-stakeholder. And then we are planning tentatively a meeting of key stakeholders and technical working groups in October or so. So again, we are, I think this is meant to be sort of, led by WHO and UNICEF, but it's our initiative as a sector. So we are keen for you to be involved, whether you want just to be made aware of news and updates, or if you want to share evidence and documents, or if you would like to be more centrally involved, we very much welcome your involvement. So please get in touch with us. And again, specifically for the call for evidence, the deadline is by the 5th of July. So we're looking forward to hearing from you. So thanks,
Okay.
and back to you, Clarissa.
Okay, great. Thanks, Marina. And we're almost at the end here, and I'm going to turn over in a couple of seconds to Lisa Rudge from the UK FCDO to close. But before I do that, I'm just going to say two things. One is just to echo Marina's shout out to Kellyanne Naylor. Kellyanne, are you there? Can you turn on your camera and wave at everybody? Who's been doing a huge amount of work behind the scenes on this, and we're very behind the scenes and in front of the scenes, and very grateful to her. And then the second thing is, I noticed that in the chat several people have asked about the slides. I know the slides were quite complex. There was a lot of information in them, so they are going to be available, and you are going to be able to access the slides. So now I'll turn over to Lisa. The UK FCDO has been a very strong supporter of this work. And we'd very much like you, Lisa, to say the final word and close this webinar for us. So over to you.
Great. Thanks, Clarissa. And what an amazing webinar it's been. As you can see from the chat, it's been a very rich discussion, lots of insights. And really, a lot of our work is really building on the amazing work that's already been going on by partners on this call, those joining, and really learning from decades of support for WASH infrastructure and WASH services. I just wanted to say a couple of words of how we're trying to tackle this through one example, which is our WASH Systems for Health program, in which we're really trying to align our support to the priorities identified by governments in 6 countries. So we undertook assessments to identify for governments to be able to identify and say what their priorities were in terms of their systems strengthening agenda, both at the national and subnational level. And the partners who are involved in the program are currently sort of developing the monitoring framework. And one of the things that's really important with that is this alignment. So the alignment with the GLASS, with the JMP indicators, and also with the other sector stakeholders and with national systems already in place. The idea is to avoid duplication and really promote that kind of cohesion and aligning behind a vision. So just to say that, for example, we're trying to kind of move towards this idea of measuring our contribution to overall system strengthening rather than purely the attribution of the program's kind of interventions at the country level. And in order to do that, it is really important to have that shared vision, the strong monitoring framework that is internationally agreed and to which other partners can sign up to. There was another comment in the chat, which was around what I would call kind of the qualitative information and how we capture the how is the change happening, some of the more kind of complex thing, or some of the things that are more difficult to measure in a kind of in a monitoring framework. So it's just to highlight that the importance of that sector dialogue amongst stakeholders is really important in order to illustrate how that change happens, which we also need to collect, including through kind of research and a strong learning element as well, which we have in our program. So I think that this is a great initiative, and I think my job is also to sort of thank you all, call for perhaps other partners and as many donors, partners, CSOs, and national governments really to get involved in this initiative, share their views, their experiences to really make this something that we collectively own. And then just to thank everyone on this webinar, all those who spoke, the organizers, the presenters and the panelists, and all of you who joined today to listen and to make the chat really interactive and motivate further work on this. So thank you very much to all of you, and wishing you a lovely day, evening, wherever you are. Thanks.
Thanks. Bye, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.